Hello and welcome to this little discussion on our latest issue. We have of course focused on, and even from last week, which ranks according to a lot of people among the most momentous in India's political history. Some people are ranking it on par with the emergency on how momentous a move it is. It is of course the change of status in Kashmir's constitutional status. The Constitution of India is nothing if not a moral document. All the sheer number of words it contains, it's apparently the longest document in the world, and all its articles and clauses and subclauses, they are not an end in themselves. They are actually a means to an end, and their final objective is to produce a certain kind of justice, a certain kind of republic that is based on justice, freedom, universal rights. This being the case, seen in that light, what we have seen in the last week is a rather unprecedented set of events. The Home Minister rose up in Parliament and passed a resolution based on a presidential order that pretty much rendered Article 370 as it relates to the former state of Jammu and Kashmir a dead letter. It still remains on the statute book, but its essential feature, which was to be considered a certain kind of buffer or a conduit between the Indian constitution and the former state of Jammu and Kashmir, that has been taken away. Its special status has been taken away, and another bill was passed that bifurcated the former state into two union territories. Now, Article 370, if you look at it, there are lots of views on it, but the fundamental feature of it was something that that is very analogous to the constitutional principle, the fundamental constitutional principle. Like, you know, our constitution inherits a hell of a lot from the British kind of legal edifice, constitutional edifice. The critical difference is that the sovereignty is actually made over to the people of India. The government rules according to the wishes of the people. That is the fundamental structure of our republic. Article 370, the key feature it contained was that any change, anything that happens in the Constitution of India, if it has to apply to Kashmir, would have to be given to Kashmir through the conduit of Article 370, where the consent of the local government who represent the people there is paramount. That is the feature that was considered problematic because there was no seamless application of the Indian Constitution to Kashmir. Now that article has been taken away or rendered null and void in a sense, in a way where, apart from all other things, even the most enthusiastic supporter would have to accept that one thing that's missing is the consent of the people. We don't even know what they think, the people of Kashmir, about this move, where their constitutional status has been altered fundamentally. Now we are in a state, joining me in this discussion are my colleagues Pranay Sharma, Bhavna and Puneet. And Bhavna, I wish to come to you here. Now we come to a state where ex post facto, in a way, we are trying to create consent for this in Kashmir. So we have had these two very dramatically different kind of in tone set of events. First, the parliamentary this thing where the thing was pretty much rolled. It's pretty much like, bulldozed through parliament through sheer majority, and even the opposition could not contain, could not summon up any degree of reasonable principled opposition to, although there were patches of dissent, but they got large numbers of votes. So in essence, Indian Parliament has passed these things, and while Kashmir was pretty much locked down, completely out of the equation. Yeah. What they called it an information black hole. That's what. So something relating to them happening in Indian Parliament without them knowing anything about it, or we knowing anything about what they think about it. Yeah. Now the Prime Minister comes on TV and gives a speech, and the tone is entirely different. It's placatory, it's mollifying, it's appealing to the people of Kashmir to come on board. And we have seen this very astonishing thing with Narendra Modi's rule, even over the last 5 years, that things that are sometimes deemed completely difficult and almost impossible to conceive, they manage to pull off. Like something like demonetization happens, and you think the people feel the pain, and that pain will be reflected in the elections. But you see a dramatically different election in UP thereafter, and even the general elections before that, like all the indices were down, farm sector was in crisis, manufacturing was low, everything you could think of, all the indices were down.
Then you had Balakot.
State assemblies were like voting them out, and hey presto, like out of the gloom and doom they come back with a. Do you think he although this Kashmiris exist at an emotional and political distance way more than anyone else in this country from the Indian Republic, do you think he can pull it off, this one?
Yes, they have, and I think they will. But the only thing is the security forces are going to stay there for quite some time. I don't think that, I mean, for maybe decade, maybe more than that. So, I mean, their logic was to restore normalcy, because they say, what is 370 given them in all these years? The situation is still the same, the state has not developed, yes, and nothing really has happened. So they think now that they can take things in their own hand, and then they can actually take the state forward.
Although there are some divergent opinions about this, there's a big narrative of a lot of money going to Kashmir and them still staying in the sullen kind of aloofness from India, and the unfairness of this. But on indices, I think Jean Drèze or somebody had put up a placard recently where he compared the indices of Kashmir with Gujarat. Infant mortality, education, life expectancy, this, that. On all parameters, actually, they are better than Gujarat. So, what exactly are we calling them over for? There are paradoxes here, So
there is no industry, there is no growth that way. There are no world standard universities, there are no good hospitals. So those are the things yes, they are saying that those things haven't come to the state as of now, and that is true. A lot of money has been pumped in. Maybe it didn't go to the right people, didn't reach the people, because we all know that how the successive governments have been with the separatists. They have been state guests, and they have been like they've got everything from the state.
No, the mainstream politicians there are a sector slightly different from the separatist leadership,
course, yeah,
and they are the ones who locally they have always been seen as the pro-India. Why would rendering them completely irrelevant be a useful thing? That is something that
because they are not playing footsie with the government, because they are not very amenable to the BJP-led government, and so they basically want a government which is friendly to them,
sure,
which they can handle, which they can. So naturally, these they're going on and on about these two families. Third family they mentioned, which the Gandhis.
I mean, they were in fact in government with one of the families till 1 year ago, and they had a chance. It was the BJP, so it was not as if they were completely persona non grata, and ways of handling the situation could have been devised through a more collaborative framework also. But things collapsed. Things have not gone according to.
Even when they were in government with PDP, there were a lot of people within the BJP who were not happy once when the government was formed, and also when it was continuing. They said it is like they're complete opposites, they just cannot last together. But the BJP's point of view, I mean, Mr. Ram Madhav, Amit Shah, Mr. Modi, their point of view was that you have to have a foothold in the state.
Yes.
So for them it was gaining a foothold there, whether it meant going with the PDP or whatever.
Even going ahead, finally to translate or to kind of to convey any positive intention of the Indian state to the ground there, you do need an intermediary. So some sort of political ecology sustaining there has to be like paramount actually.
We know how BJP functions, so they will want their own ecology there, they will want their own people there, and that is where we are moving now.
Since you mentioned the BJP, one more thing I wanted to just stepping back from Kashmir a little bit and maybe perhaps generalizing this in a different way. Modi, the first regime, and the regime now, there's this very stark qualitative difference. But this is almost like with Shah coming in, there was no one who matched the stature of Amit Shah in the first government. It was just Modi, and the rest of them did not have the same degree of potency for some reason.
Absolutely.
This is almost like a diarchy, so Shah he certainly has a lot more agency, he contains a lot more power in him, and with this thing, the way it unfolded also, you could see that there's slightly different kind of separation of division of labor between them in one sense. Shah comes in and bowls fast from one end and then Modi comes and does spin from the other end almost.
Literally
Yeah. This tough cop, bad cop,
Bad
good
cop,
cop
good
kind of one, this
Yeah.
thing. And we want to say something about that? How did that
The moment they gave Home Ministry to Amit Shah, so we all knew what was going to happen, because BJP they have their own agenda which they want to fulfill. This was one of them which they have been talking about for so many years. Right from the time 370 came in, they have been opposing it, and they have been saying since 1952 that it should go. So they have been from Jan Sangh days and everything. So it's been their agenda. And this could be done only by the Home Ministry. So this was done, and then triple talaq was done earlier. So some of the things which only Mr. Amit Shah can do, those things will happen now.
A brief thing from you, Pranay, on historically this BJP has now actually fulfilled one of the long-standing things on their three core, three-item agenda that they had: Uniform Civil Code, Ayodhya, and you think this is a certain kind of a tone setter for other things to happen in the near future?
Meaning, depending on what you have in mind.
Yes, I mean obviously it would be Uniform Civil Code. A triple talaq is a certain kind of movement towards that, and Ayodhya, the thing is unfolding in court even as we speak. We'll just get to that in one moment.
See, there are two things which needs to be clarified. One, which they always had this argument that it's an appeasement of a certain section. Whether that is something you're trying to break to make them equal citizens with all kind of privileges, that remains to be seen. But at the same time, in that process, if a section feels that they are second-class citizens, always under pressure, that's going to create a problem. So this is something which we will have to watch and see how it pans out.
That's right.
What they have in mind, yes, some of the things, if you want to use something which is applicable to all the citizens as equal citizens,
That's the thing.
that is the most important thing.
These are very tricky territories to traverse actually. Uniform Civil Code seen from one sort of a monochromatic, and it seems to be a good, because why should some people be denied certain rights? Even with Article 370, one of the arguments used to be that India passes let's say the RTI, it will not automatically apply.
But the thing is, with Uniform Civil Code, it's not just triple talaq was probably a move towards that, but then it will involve other things. It will involve the Sikh marriage, for example.
That is the precise problem with it.
Yeah, so there are so many other things which probably they will not want to touch.
It will not, yeah.
So I don't think Uniform Civil Code, as such, they will not move towards it.
There are plenty of, the sheer variety of customs that come under the Hindu ecosystem would be the ones that fly in the face of what seems to be a modern, rational way of doing things. They will all be, one of the arguments for Sabrimala was in fact that this kind of slightly specialized, habitat where women are not allowed. So the tradition makes for that. Uniform Civil Code would, so the Hindu thing will itself be as opposed to it as we saw with the Hindu Code Bill, for instance. But let's we can foresee that Uniform Civil Code perhaps will stay a little on the back burner. But Puneet, let's come to Ayodhya and what is happening, and are we?
Ayodhya, see, the Supreme Court's already said daily hearings. Now, what is unusual about Justice Gogoi's order on how this case has to proceed is that he said that the Constitution Bench, which is hearing the matter, will sit 5 days in a week, including Mondays. Mondays, regular hearing matters are not taken up by the Supreme Court. Okay, so even on Mondays, the Constitution Bench will sit. So Monday to Friday, every week, irrespective of holidays, the bench is going to sit. Now, Justice Gogoi retires on the 17th of November. So the speculation is, and since he's heading the bench, you can expect the verdict to come in, from what I gather, by the first week of November. In between, you'll have 1 week of the Supreme Court vacation for Dussehra, 1 week of Supreme Court vacation for Diwali in October, which gives them ample time to write the judgment. And so the expectation is that the first week of November, this should come in.
Well, there you have it. This is like pretty fast track. This is the first 6 months of the Modi, the second term, and August 370 and November Ayodhya.
Which also, in a sense, I think we also need to put it in perspective of the fact that these are all sticky issues which have been there, outstanding matters of the manifesto for the BJP for a long time.
Very long
and
time.
all of them have got priority within the first 100 or 150 days of
Yeah.
this government. So all the niggling points, everything, all problematic issues are what they're dealing with first, instead of keeping them on the back burner and saying, okay, let's see how the government, let's look at the economy
But then
first.
all the time they
Yes.
used to have this, let's defer
Yeah.
this, let's defer this.
Yeah.
Now
let's
it's
look at the
yeah.
immediate challenges first.
They used
So
to
they're
be
not
like a
doing
butt of
that.
jokes very often,
Yeah.
Ayodhya is always on your this thing, but you never move on
And
it.
lots of their supporters were not happy that even despite getting such a verdict in 2014, that they did not move towards it.
That's right. Okay, now let's come back to 370, Puneet. I just need to, we have a variety of articles in our issue. You must pick it up. We have the RSS point of view being expressed by Sheshadri Chari. We have an old dissenter from within BJP in Yashwant Sinha. We have a view from Ladakh. We have the army with, and a security this thing point of view being expressed by Vapula Balachandran, and a variety of other things. Among them, we have a series of lawyers and legal experts and legal eagles dwelling on what exactly was done this time, because it was a legal, very, very sophisticated legal maneuvering that enabled 370 to be rendered a dead letter this time, because it went through Article 367, and if you look closely at the Indian Constitution, it looks like some very dense inner city map with lot of lanes and by-lanes,
Like a
and
maze, yeah.
like a maze. Every lane intersects another lane. An ordinary person can't make sense of it. Puneet, please take us through what.
We also have something, the impact of this on the northeast.
On the
That's
northeast.
another
Yes,
very
yes.
important part.
One of the things, before we come to that, one of the things that people are observing about this set of events is the kind of precedent it can set. We already have a kind of uproar in Darjeeling, and if state reorganization, the issue actually comes very seriously on the table, then we are looking at a whole lot of there are a lot of states that have been, the demands for statehood that have been pending for a long time. Vidarbha, UP has always called for a 4-part division, and only some have been granted. Telangana was done, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, but many are pending, and that we might be looking going forward at a vastly different political map of India. So another thing that can, coming back to the legal point, is if very, very seemingly inviolate constitutional provisions can be altered through such means which are not immediately directly. Article 370 was not directly touched, and it was through 367 that a very, very fundamental definition was changed. If that can happen, then all bets are off, is it not?
See,
what did they do here?
Look, in terms of Article 370 and the constitution order by the president that the government has brought, I don't think there was any sophistication in it. There was stealth. There was no sophistication. Yes. Legally, there was no sophistication.
Legally,
because what they have done is they have used one article of the constitution, which is 367, to amend 370. Then gone back to 368,
yes.
Then gone back to 370. So there's been too much of to and fro. Now the problem there is that 370 in itself, if you go through the text of the article, in itself has provisions which isolate it from amendments using Article 367.
Which immunize it from other articles
and
making incursions
reading
on it.
With Article 1 of the Constitution, and then saying that these are the powers under Article 367 and the president can do it. A lot of them will come under very severe legal scrutiny. The other very key point here is that the government, considering that JNK has been under president's rule, has treated the governor in Kashmir as the voice of the people, as the assembly, as the government.
Yeah.
Which is a very anomalous kind of...
now the governor is not the voice of the people.
Yes.
He does not represent an elected government. Okay, he's a nominee of the president, appointed through a recommendation of the center.
Pranay, you two please come in on this. Like we've had
I want to ask something, because if what the Prime Minister said yesterday, that very soon they are also going to go for elections in Jammu and Kashmir. So once you have an elected government there, and if they ratify this, then it gets a legitimate thing, because that is the provision.
Exactly. But then this was something that should have been, there will certainly be considerable delay now, because I don't see elections happening within a month or
No
2
chance.
months.
Yes.
Because
I
they'll
don't
have to
think it'll
first,
happen
yeah,
this year.
and it won't happen this year.
Because
because
winter-
the
Timeline you have heard?
Yeah, winters will set in once, because anyway things will settle down after some time. Then winters are going to set in, and after November you can't have elections there.
So you have a kind of certain kind
And-
of undecided status of Kashmir continuing for the
No, and the
conceivable
other
future.
thing is specifically on whether the assembly has to ratify it, because of the mischief in this amendment that has been brought in 368. The assembly will have no role in ratifying it, because what the amendment essentially says is that the Sadr-e Riyasat of Kashmir has now been replaced
By the
not
governor.
by the chief minister but by the governor.
Governor, yes.
Okay, so only the governor's consent is required, the chief minister or the assembly's consent is not required, which is going to cause a lot more heartburn.
You know, going forward, I just wanted to ask, center-state relations, Article 356, state governments being dismissed, in all these kind of things, all these events through the 80s was rampant with,
Right.
you know, the governor was never seen as any kind of representative. Technically, he is not. He's a representative of the
Exactly,
center.
yeah.
How do you at all, you know, make that transition to him being deemed the voice of the people? I mean, you know, where is that? How? I mean, that would fly against the very
I'm
logic
quite
of.
sure that when the Supreme Court starts hearing the petitions that there have been 3 writ petitions that have challenged this decision in the Supreme Court. For some reason, the Supreme Court did not find it fit enough for a case of an urgent hearing,
Yeah.
and they said that we'll hear it next week. But I'm sure that this
These things
aspect also will come under challenge. The other aspect, which you know a lot of us seem to not be talking about, is the fate of Ladakh. Ladakh, of course, has also been made a union territory minus
Yes,
a legislature.
yes, yes.
Let us not forget that Ladakh also has a population, 46.4% population of Muslims.
Yes.
It forms 2 districts, Kargil,
Kargil and Ladakh,
Leh.
Yes, yes.
Kargil is largely a Muslim minority district.
Muslim majority.
Muslim majority district. Of course, not Sunnis, but more of Shias,
Shia,
more of
yeah.
Nurbakshis. Same even in Leh. If you move beyond the Nubra Valley, move towards places like Bogdan, it's mostly Shias and Nurbakshis. There is going to be a lot of resentment.
Yes.
There have been protests in Kargil since yesterday.
That's right.
And you know,
A separate
this-
shutdown has happened in Kargil. Yeah.
Exactly. So and they want to be integrated back with Kashmir. They don't want to stay with
A Buddhist,
with a Buddhist majority Ladakh. So it's going to open up a whole lot
The whole
of problems.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So there are practical problems of governance here.
Yes.
The legal problems and frankly speaking, ethical, moral issues which are pretty fundamental.
The other aspect,
And
you know,
one thing I wanted to. There's one aspect here, Kashmir from the very beginning. You know, there was this former president of Pakistan, who used to keep calling it the core issue. The core issue is Kashmir. That goes back in a way to the old view that the K in Pakistan actually stands for Kashmir, and straight away the old idea of it being a disputed territory, therefore Pakistan being party to the dispute, UN resolutions, China now.
Sunil, since 1947.
We have an international dispute here, and all these things we cannot. There are things that the government can control. There are things that the government actually cannot control beyond a point, despite us being a big market and governments wanting to. How does this play out internationally?
So that's what I'm saying. Right from 1947, Pakistan claimed that it is a party to Kashmir. It had a claim on Kashmir. It went to war with India 3 times over Kashmir. And Article 370 and what was done by the government here, in a way, perhaps caught the Pakistani government by surprise. Since then, Imran Khan government has been under tremendous pressure from the opposition parties, though it is taking action on corruption and other things to marginalize them. But there is a voice that, I mean, such a big decision was taken by India, but were you aware of it, or what happened? That is one. Now it is trying to show, in a way, this response that we are also going to contest it as much as possible. Now, what are the means that they have?
weak and pro forma, has it not been?
See, so far they are trying, because for Pakistan, what are the options that they have? Earlier, the best or tried option for them would be to use jihadi sections or the terrorists who are based in Pakistan against India, foment trouble problem, and say that things are not, they're contesting every single move. Now with the FATF there, Pakistan is under tremendous pressure and under scrutiny.
Anti-terror kind of treaty, which.
So it is already on the grey list. If it doesn't show progress on what kind of an action it is taking against these terrorist groups based in the country, it may go into the blacklist.
The old policy of like using terrorists as power, they can't do that anymore so clean easily.
The other thing that they can do is to create tension, increase it along the LOC with the army, which will bring the attention of the UN or the international community to it that this is a flashpoint. The other thing which we were talking about.
Do it. Their hands full on the Afghan side, and
see, they can't take it beyond because the economy is in a very bad shape. They can't really afford to go to any kind of a war with India at this juncture. That will absolutely damage the economy. But if they're desperate, we don't know what they're going to do. That is one. The other, which a lot of people were talking about, that they may play the Afghan card because the US is so dependent on Pakistan's support in delivering the Taliban to the negotiation table so that they can ensure a smooth withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan, which is one of the top agendas of Donald Trump. But now, interestingly, the Taliban has come out with a statement saying that Kashmir and Afghanistan are two separate issues.
Yeah.
So this really limits the options for Pakistan. So it will be very interesting to see. The UN has reacted, but that is something India can live with.
yes,
As long as the UN Security Council, other members don't take it up and start, pass a resolution or something
out
like
of the
that.
permanent members, one is France, whose economy we practically revived single-handedly.
So I don't think, they will, unless there is big trouble in Kashmir, something like
China. Where does China come in? And what is?
China, I think,
It certainly had views on Ladakh.
it had views on Ladakh, but I think that was mainly to do with they were worried about the part which falls in that western sector of the unsettled boundary with India.
Aksai Chin.
So that is what they were trying to anticipate, because China thinks that if we don't protest on any move whenever India takes, then it would be seen that okay, this part is okay with China, which it is not. So it's trying to say.
Seen purely in geopolitical terms, there's this view that okay, this was the British deliberately left this thorn in the flesh of India so that it would continue bleeding, and Kashmir is somewhere part of that great game, that Central Asian this thing. So now would big powers in the world, China, UK, whoever, US, even the US, despite, would they want India to be liberated from something that troubled was one of its key liabilities? Would they just let them walk away, or would Kashmir, would they try to keep that thing intact so that there is problems continue? Everyone needs finally an angle on which.
No, the problem is that all of them also realize, irrespective of the government which is ruling India, none of them can really allow Kashmir to go. Kashmir is the core, it's a central thing in the Indian structure. So BJP may have a different way of looking at it, the Congress may have a different way of looking at it, and any other party, but it is central.
That they're the same
Problem is, that is the way also the Pakistanis see. Because over the years, so many decades they have been talking about Kashmir, it's very difficult for any leadership there, civilian leadership I'm talking about, to move away from that. The moment they try and do that, they'll be under tremendous pressure. So we have to look at a scenario where both can agree to live with a situation, and perhaps move on.
And India has increased the pressure by talking about POK also.
Yes.
That is a
That's
position-
next now.
That's a position India can't give up.
Exactly.
Because that is the position of the parliament.
Yeah.
Because initially that was the thing, that when they created this union territory about containing whether POK was at all considered part of it or not, that so de facto you have actually given up POK, and then Amit Shah had to come to parliament and say no, we'll give up our lives for it and all that. So it's a very we have been cast into a phase that is a lot of possibilities. maybe as they kept saying, what will you do in terms of security doctrine in Kashmir will never stay in Kashmir. It will bleed back into central India. It will bleed into northeast. We have set precedents in the constitution, in political, in terms of political morality, in terms of what can be done, and with a set of actions that have international ramifications, so to speak, and legal, constitutional, which over a period of over the near future and probably perhaps even long term will be very, very generative in terms of
What he had begun with, since the time the Narendra Modi government has come to power, 2014 and also the second term, their attempt has been to look at a lot of things and try and see how the status quo can be broken.
Yes.
How that pans out.
They are disruptors.
Yeah, so this cannot be accepted, in many things which for successive regimes,
Yes.
they were okay with it. Now, how that pans out, this is something, a lot of people have questions, depending on where you stand, how you look at it.
Only thing is that old paradox of you break what the existing thing, but what do you replace it with? So one of the key Seshadri Chari writing here, for instance, the RSS is one of the most interesting organizations in our time, because these are all items which are actually on their agenda, and which the BJP actually as an instrument of that politics carries out, and the RSS has always had a kind of stayed with a certain kind of skeptical aloofness from the Indian Republic and its symbols for decades and decades, and it views the spirit of the constitution as it is generally understood. They have not entirely endorsed all of it. So going forward and amending the constitution on various other parameters, he has always been part of the agenda. And does this set a precedent? Where do things go from here? We are actually in very, very interesting times on all domains and parameters that we can think of. And thank you for being with us. But please do pick up this issue, and we'll be soon back with you